Yeah. Okay. So if anybody has any comments or reflections from our last session, anything that stuck with you that you carried over to this week? What did we talk about last Tuesday?
So,
So, what about the soul? What is one thing that you remember about the soul?
it's more than we think.
It's more than you think. Yes, it is beyond our thinking.
Yes.
Anything else? Anybody remembers about the soul?
I remember.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Gabriella, then Kim.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that I remember that and I wrote a note for myself. It says that if we don't know who we are, we can recognize our Dharma.
Wonderful point, and that's the whole reason the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, to help Arjuna and us realize our dharma. And Kim, go ahead.
I just wrote for my notes that it's the eternal part of God. It's the part of us that's not temporal.
Wow, beautiful. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So
I think you said that our karma is our purpose. Did I get that right?
Adharma is
Dharma
is our purpose.
not karma.
Dharma.
Our dharma is our purpose.
Yeah, karma. Yeah, karma. Yeah, the karma or the dharma is our purpose. Okay, I got that wrong. Here we go. DH. Okay, I thought that was something wrong there.
Thank you.
Our purpose is to get rid of karma.
Yeah.
Let's get started. We have quite an exciting session, which we are going to go through. It's actually the very purpose of yoga. It's actually described in the Yoga Sutras that the purpose of yoga is actually to control the mind. And so our topic for the day is actually the mind, which is
a very important topic in the Bhagavad Gita, because our whole life actually revolves around our mind. So we'll read some of the verses from Bhagavad Gita on mind. There are quite a few that I sent the reading. We won't be able to read all of them, but we'll read a few, and then we'll jump into our presentation just to set up the context of why we're talking about the mind.
this is scattered throughout the Bhagavad Gita, the mind, right?
Yeah, scattered throughout. So we see that how Arjuna starts dealing with his mind. Arjuna fighting with his mind right from the very beginning in chapter 1. Arjuna said in chapter 1, text 28, "My dear Krishna, seeing my friends and relatives present before me in such a fighting spirit, I feel the limbs of my body quivering and my mouth drying up." And in text 30, he says, "I'm now unable to stand here any longer. I'm forgetting myself and my mind is reeling. I see only causes of misfortune. Oh Krishna, killer of the Kesi demon." So you see the mind is coming up in such interesting ways in Arjuna's life in chapter 1. And then Krishna addresses Arjuna in reference to his mind. He calls him, do not yield to this degrading impotence, which is actually coming from the mind. It does not become you. Give up such petty weakness of heart and arise. So again, referring to Arjuna's mind. And then in text 48, he says, "Perform your duty equipoised, O Arjuna, abandoning all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga." So again, pointing to Arjuna's mind that he should give up this mind's attachment to success or failure.
And that is the purpose of yoga.
That is the purpose of yoga.
And then it goes on and on, like even this particular verse, right? Text 55.
Yeah, it's a very important verse.
O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he's said to be in pure transcendental consciousness.
That defines what self-realization is.
Yeah, exactly. And also, as I was reading it, I was thinking that a lot of times we don't realize that there's still a difference between the mind and the self. People tend to, conflate the two and say they're one and the same. But in Bhagavad Gita, we see that how the mind is actually seen as a separate energy, that is actually within us, and how to, isolate or separate the self from that. And that's how actually we control the mind, when we become the observer of the mind instead of identifying with the mind.
One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or related when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So these verses 55 through 58 in second chapter, they tell us quite a bit about how to become free from the control of mind, and what are the things that we want to get rid of from our mind. So we can move on.
This is very nice. Text 60. The
Yeah.
senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination who's endeavoring to control them. So here is like empathy, that it's hard to control, the senses are so strong that even a person who's trying to control them will sometimes find that their mind has been carried away by these senses.
So in this situation, the senses are acting as more powerful than the mind. But the goal of yoga is to make mind more powerful than our senses. And 62 and 63 beautiful verses, Krishna talks about how we get trapped in this material world. While contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. So we really start desiring something. If we don't get it, then we get very angry or frustrated. 63.
From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So we see the whole sequence, and we're going to get into this a lot more in our presentation, but this is a whole sequence that we see how from lust to complete fall down.
And the mind is the centerpiece here.
I love this.
Text 70, go ahead.
A person who's not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled, but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires.
So here is a recommendation of how to become free from the control of our desires, which are flowing into the mind like a river flowing into the ocean.
This is also a really important one, text 6.
Yeah. So here, this is another aspect of mind Krishna talks about. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So our mind may be thinking about something else while the body is doing something else. So it's trying to bring them in harmony. And this is the process of yoga, is to bring our whole being into harmony and then not being false pretenders.
Of course, here what they're talking about is false pretenders, right? People who are not just trying to restrain, but they're, artificially, it seems like they're showing off that I'm so renounced, but their mind actually is. So the idea being that we have to be authentic and we have to be honest in our practices. I think we should.
And text 40 is an interesting one. Text 39. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So the soul is filled with this real transcendental spiritual knowledge, but the lust covers the real knowledge of the soul. And the lust is sitting in our senses, our mind, intelligence. Text 42 is a very important one. It describes the hierarchy of different things that we are made of.
The working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is even higher than the intelligence.
So
We talked about the mind being.
yes, there's so many beautiful verses. If you just went through all of them,
It would take so much time. I'm just trying to, keep a track of the time.
Yeah.
So this is actually one of the most important ones, and I think that
text
we
5
can,
and 6.
yeah. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well.
For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So, and finally, Krishna says, one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. So it's how to control the mind, what is the mind, what are the outcome of controlling the mind, how do we make our mind our friend. These are some of the very important topics which are spread throughout the Gita. And with that said, we will jump into our presentation. We'll tackle some of these things in greater detail. Let me share.
As we practice meditation, we actually, for the first time, we become aware of the mind. And we see that how the mind controls us, that even when we know that something is so harmful for us. And this is a question that Arjuna is actually inquiring from Krishna. He says, people know that this is not good for me. This is not going to help me. But it's almost like they're helpless in their actions, right? They just helplessly go ahead and do what their mind or their senses dictate, and they come under the control of anger. So why is that? And another thing that Arjuna says is that for me, it is easier to control the raging wind, but to control the restless mind is very, very difficult. So
sometimes we take mind, we are too easy on our mind. And we think, okay, this is whatever the mind wants, I need to give in. And through that, we can see the power of the mind. Even when we try to resist it, the mind comes with so many reasons why we should go ahead and do things. And therein lies the persuasive power of our mind. It uses all techniques. So last session, we talked about identity, soul, 3 types of self, evidences of the soul, reincarnation, and things like that. In this session, we'll cover what is the mind. Am I the body or mind or something else? But wait a minute, I think this is messed up slide. Okay, sorry. Something happened. So again, an overview of what the mind is. We talked about how the soul is the real self, which is covered by a gross body and a subtle body. So the gross body is physical body that we can see, and whereas the subtle body is the body which is made of mind, intelligence, and ego. So mind is something that always accompanies the soul in this life, and it goes with us in the next life. When somebody dies, the subtle body, which is mind, intelligence, and false ego, goes with. So it is the same mind that we have been carrying for millions of lifetimes. We talked about this chariot of body, just for a recap.
This is a quick recap. So we already went through this. The senses are the horses, the mind are the reins, the chariot driver is the intelligence, and the consciousness is just a person who's the real passenger, the real self, is just lying in a state of sleep or slumber, and letting the mind and the senses drive us wherever it wants to go.
So ideally, the soul should be controlling the intelligence, and the intelligence should be controlling the senses with the help of mind. But normally it turns upside down, and the senses control, or the mind starts controlling the whole chariot. So go ahead.
One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well.
For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends, but for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. So the key verses on the mind, and this appears in the chapter on the Dhyana Yoga chapter, in the sixth chapter. And this is another place in the Bhakti Wisdom text where the power of mind is described, how the mind is so powerful. It says in the Bhagavad Purana, it says all the senses have been under the control of the mind since time immemorial, and the mind himself never comes under the sway of any other. He is stronger than the strongest, and his godlike power is fearsome. Therefore, anyone who can bring the mind under control becomes the master of all the senses, and actually becomes the master of everybody.
Everyone. It's the most difficult thing to do, but it's also the most courageous thing to do.
So going back to the basics, who is the mind and what is the mind? Are we a body with a mind or a mind with a body? Sometimes we mix them up so up close, we can't.
Look at your hand. How do you know it's really yours? It seems obvious, unless you've experienced the rubber hand illusion. In this experiment, a dummy hand is placed in front of you, and your real hand is hidden behind a screen. Both are simultaneously stroked with a paintbrush. No matter how much you remind yourself the dummy hand isn't yours, you eventually start to feel like it is, and inevitably flinch when it's threatened with a knife. That may just be a temporary trick, but it speaks to a larger truth. Our bodies, the physical, biological parts of us, and our minds, the thinking, conscious aspects, have a complicated, tangled relationship.
So this is where it becomes hard to differentiate between, and that's where Bhagavad Gita comes into the picture by telling us, hey, the senses, what the senses are urging, that's not the urging of the mind. And mind is a separate entity, intelligence is a separate entity, we are a separate entity.
So there are so many selves within us, right?
Yeah.
And we are continuously confused about, what is what. And so we think that I'm so helpless. And that's why the soul actually feels helpless, because he's being tossed around by all of these different aspects of the self, pulling us in all the different directions.
And what happens in our conditioned state is that the self is kind of almost like sleeping in a stupor, and it gives its power of attorney of thinking, feeling, and willing to the mind. And then whatever the mind dictates, we think that I am thinking that, but it's not us thinking. It's the mind that is thinking. So once we make that distinction, then it becomes easier to deal with the mind.
So another way to understand this analogy is actually using the analogy of computer. So we have in the computer, we have a hardware and we have a software. And so the hardware is actually the body. And we'll actually get a little bit more into it later, that, in the brain, because that's a question that may come up. So the body means the hardware, which is, which includes the brain, but the mind is actually the software.
It's like the operating system. You have Apple or Windows. It's the operating system, which basically allows us to access different parts of the computer. Without the operating system, we can't access the computer. And that's what the mind is. It's the operating system. So you can look at the mind in two ways, and we use the mind in two ways, as a window to the world, or as a screen on which we see the whole life kind of happening before us.
It's like a movie screen, right? So when the window of, when we see the mind as a window, and if the window is, is not clear, if it is covered by layers of dust, then what we see through the window is actually a distorted version. And that's our condition right now.
And then we only see like the world through this narrow window of our mind. So we are not seeing the complete reality. Whatever reality we are seeing is through this narrow window of our mind. And therefore our vision is very limited. And
therefore we cannot completely trust.
We cannot completely trust our mind. It's only one particular angle of vision.
And then the screen is, of course, a very interesting thing, because the mind is continuously showing us movies on the screen. We're always in a movie theater watching the movies that the mind is, or the narrations the mind is telling us. And we get so absorbed in these narratives that we start thinking that whatever the mind is telling us is true. And as a result, we believe it, we respond to it just like we would in a movie theater, respond to all the stories that is going on. So in this way, the mind actually keeps us captive. The mind in a conditioned self, in a conditioned state, actually is the reason why we are stuck here, because we are absorbed in these two activities of either watching the movie through the screen, on the screen, or looking at the world through the window.
So Krishna says in the 15th chapter that we have five senses, and these five senses are grouped about the mind. The mind is also sometimes called the sixth sense because it's the center of receiving all the stimuli and input from all the five senses, and then a complete picture is formed inside the mind. The senses, they just send their input. So it kind of simulates a reality for us, and whatever we perceive of ourselves, whatever we perceive of others and this world, is kind of a simulation that happens in the mind. And
it's based on all the input.
Yeah, it's based on the input that is coming to the
five senses.
And it kind of and then based on that, the mind, then one of the key functions of the mind is to accept or reject. So I want this, I don't want this. I like this person, I don't like this person.
This is good, this is bad.
This is good, this is bad.
This is too hot, this is too hot, this is too cold. So the function of the mind is accepting or rejecting. Just talking about it so exhausting. That's what the mind is doing continuously. If this is boring, this is good, right? So the mind is like
something that is interesting becomes boring the next moment, and that's the function of the mind.
That's the function of the mind. Yeah, it's very, very fickle. So here is the function of the mind, like you were talking about right now, is thinking, feeling, and willing. So. Did you want to say
so we talked about the perception. That's the first function of the mind, is to create a perception, or the perception actually happens in the mind. The senses, they don't perceive anything. And the second very important function of the mind is memory and recollection. So whatever experiences we have, whatever we see through our senses, they are deposited as a memory in our mind, and it carries over. These memories can carry over from one life to the next.
They do. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we have so many experiences that seem a little odd to us. Why is it that all of a sudden we are afraid of some heights or we're afraid of water? That didn't, we had no reason in this lifetime, but we still are. So those things are because there is, memory deposited, within us, which causes certain, behavioral patterns, or thought patterns.
And we may think that the memory and all that happens in the brain, but brain is again just a physical apparatus.
I think we'll come to that.
Are we coming to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is all happening, and then from the near-death experiences we discussed last time, we can see that how the brain is dead, but the memory of the whole experience and what is going on in the operating theater was perceived by the person. And the other function of the mind is intelligence. So the critical analysis, deciding about something, whether I should do this or should do that, pros and cons, weighing out the cost benefit of things. That is all that is a function of the intelligence, the deliberation.
And we'll come to that. There's another slide here which shows that the mind is like compared to a restless child, and the intelligence is like, okay, the mind says, I want this. The intelligence says, let me see what I can do about it. So the intelligence actually is, higher, but at the same time, it's what allows the mind to fulfill its desires. And then the three other functions that are actually, considered very, very important are thinking, feeling, and willing. So we'll get into this as well in a little bit later when we talk about lust. But the idea is that the mind is always contemplating. It's, receiving all of this input and then it's thinking. At that point, it's relatively easier to kind of withdraw the mind from the sense object. The next stage.
So that is the thinking is the first step of engagement with this world. We get an input and we hear about something and then we start thinking about it. Yeah. This is a very early stage.
The very early stage. But the next one is feeling. Feeling is when we actually start feeling the experience and like, oh, what would it be like if I could just get this? So the senses are throwing in some suggestions or ideas and trying to seduce us, and we're thinking, yeah, that would be really, really nice. That's the feeling stage.
That's the emotion stage. That's the desire stage, when we start desiring something. So that's another function of the mind, is all the desires that we experience, that is happening in the mind. Mind is like you can think of the mind as a big pool where like these different desires are popping up. Yeah, like the drops, like the bubbles.
Bubbles, yeah. Just like if you have a pot of water, right, and then once the heat is on, then you see like these water bubbles just rising constantly, right? So the desires are like that; they're continuously coming to the surface. And then the third one, where it's absolutely impossible for even a sober person to withdraw the mind, is the willing stage. Where now, after going through the thinking, feeling stage, the mind is now determined and says, "I want that." And it's like, no matter who comes in between, I'm going to get it.
And that is the stage where the mind is committed. Now it is starting to take the help of intelligence. Hey, I really want it. Now can you help me? And the intelligence comes and say, okay, let's plan it together. Let's see how we can make it happen for you. So that's the willing stage. Now at the willing stage, we are starting to commit our further resources. Our body starts coming into action. Okay, now let's make it happen. We start gathering other resources that we have control over. So the willing stage is like the action stage. The feeling stage is the emotional desiring stage. Thinking stage is, okay, I just got the input, let me think. And then if you're not interested, most of the time we just reject it.
Because at the thinking stage is when the acceptance and rejection is going on.
Yeah.
Right? It's at that point the mind is thinking, okay, maybe I'll do it, maybe not. And then I'm constantly going back and forth.
Yeah.
But at feeling stage, I've already kind of made some commitment, like, okay, this feels good. Maybe I'll accept it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of getting like overcome with my emotions and desires about that particular thing.
So here is a relationship between intelligence and mind, which is really, I find this one of the best, ways to understand it, is a mother and a child. And so, a mother, so the intelligence is compared to a mother. Now, the mother could either be a permissive mother, or she could be, a mother who, takes a stand. And the mind is compared to a restless child. So a child who will throw a tantrum in the middle of a supermarket because, hey, he wants a balloon or he wants a candy. And so now the intelligence can come in either as a permissive mother, which is most of us in the conditioned state, and say, oh, my poor little thing, is that what you want? Don't worry, I'll get you whatever you like. And so the intelligence keeps pampering the child, keeps pampering the mind to the point where the mind just becomes completely, starts developing this very strong sense of entitlement that when I want something, I get it. And you need to give it to me right now. And if you don't, then I throw a tantrum.
So the intelligence doesn't even think what is good or what is bad. It just goes with what the mind wants. So it doesn't deliberate at that point, is this good or bad? But rather it says, okay, now how can I make it happen? So that's the second function of the intelligence. It gives up its first function, what is good and what is bad. Just makes it happen.
And then, or the intelligence. So the process of yoga, the process of bhakti, allows us to really sharpen the intelligence and make the intelligence strong, so that when the mind actually comes in with the proposals, then the intelligence can deliberate and say, but my dear mind, this is not good for you, or this is going to take us into a ditch. Let's rethink. Let's pull back. So that's a mother who's actually willing to work with the mind.
So that's the last verse of the third chapter. And Krishna says that one should spiritualize one's intelligence with this God conscious, spiritual consciousness. And with that fortified intelligence, now it will be very easy to control the mind. So this is another analogy that is given, is that our mind, the nature of our mind is like it's compared to a monkey. And monkeys are so mischievous by nature. They're restless by nature, mischievous by nature, always thinking of accepting and rejecting things very, very quickly. Like pretty much all the functions of the mind you can study in the nature of a monkey. And especially if a monkey is drunk, I mean, what havoc the monkey can create.
Actually, in modern mind, that's what we have right now: drunken monkeys. Because it's not, we have so many things that actually intoxicate us now, and so our mind is actually all over the place, and that's why we see so much chaos, and so much havoc being created.
It's like so many. We have 7 billion, a population of 7 billion, right? You can think of 7 billion monkeys coming together on this planet.
Yeah.
What a havoc we have created on this planet. And so the mind is considered a great cause of suffering in this material world. And as our civilization is kind of progressing, we can see that the effect of mental illness is also increasing along with physical illnesses, but the mental illness is becoming one of the biggest cause of suffering in this world right now.
It is even in places where people used to live very simple and happy life. We see now there is so much of unexpected places. We see so much of mental challenges, anxiety and stress,
depression. Even in kids in kindergarten or elementary school, they are undergoing depression. They are on antidepressant drugs, many of them.
Yeah. So this is actually something that is very, very important for us to, to really look at very seriously and to see how we can develop, just like we talk about good physical hygiene as being a precursor to good health. So similarly, there are some good mental hygiene practices that can allow us to have good mental health, right? And so that way we can help ourselves.
And I guess the whole civilization, I guess the one approach the world is taking is let's just pop in some pills, and then whatever mental issues, of course, we need some medical help in certain situations. But I guess disregarding the mind completely into this equation and thinking it is just the issue of our, medicine can just help our mind.
Yes, and of course, we want to, of course, frame that by saying that medicine does help, and that there are times when we have to take medicines. But at the same time, if we, at the same time as we work on, making our mind healthy through, practices that can pacify the mind, then it'll, to that extent, it'll help us to, deal with some of the simpler issues that may come up. So,
let's skip this one.
Yeah, I think we should skip them. So this is again, we already talked about this. Are we living in a simulation? So, as we said, that the mind is telling us stories. So we want to, come out of that simulated state and enter into a state of reality.
Are we living?
So you can watch this on your own time. Now, this is another really, really significant thing, because it's a big confusion for so many of us, that is the brain, the mind. And we always tend to think of the two as being one and the same. But in the Bhakti understanding, the brain is actually separate from the mind. And when I was studying Ayurveda, my teacher said something really nice. He said the brain is the office of the mind. So sometimes it may seem that when we look at the brain, we think, okay, it's the mind acting, but it's really the mind acting in the brain. And here is a neurosurgeon who's actually talking about how the brain does not create consciousness, or the mind is separate from the brain.
Turns out There is a scientific revolution going on now about the mind-brain discussion, the relationship between the two, that is extraordinary. And I think it's going to lead to a complete shift in our worldview that is unprecedented. And this living in a mindful universe is really about that scientific revolution.
Are you discounting whether the brain controls consciousness?
No, I think what we would say is the brain is a reducing valve or filter that allows primordial consciousness in. That is, the brain is not the creator of it. You cannot explain all of the details of human experience, especially all the evidence for non-local consciousness, the evidence for things like reincarnation, past life memories in children, indicative of reincarnation, things like that, if you think the brain is the producer of consciousness.
So what is the producer?
Well, consciousness is what exists and generates the entire universe. It's the
So
the
this is
fundamental
my
ground state.
consciousness now, right?
It's all consciousness. It's all generated within consciousness.
So anyways, you can watch this video at length, but mainly it separates the mind from brain. That's the main thing it talks about.
It turns
And of course, we've also talked about so many, we didn't, I think we mentioned it in the previous session, that there have been cases where the brain is completely dead. Medically, there is no reason, right, for the person to have any recollection, but the person actually is able to come back and report things.
Even the name of the jewelry store that the nurses were discussing.
Right. So that shows that, even that the brain is actually, not functioning, there's still something, some consciousness, which is still, operating and can perceive things. So that is actually considered to be the mind. So this is another verse.
Again, it says that this uncontrolled mind is the greatest enemy of the living entity. If one neglects it or gives it a chance, it will grow more and more powerful and will become victorious. Although it is not factual, it is very strong. We'll unpack that. It covers the constitutional position of the soul. O King, please try to conquer this mind by the weapon of service to the lotus feet of spiritual master and the supreme personality of God, and do this with great care. So the reason it is not factual is because the mind is actually matter. It is not something made of permanent stuff like we are, the soul. It is matter, and therefore it's temporary. It is not permanent, and therefore it is not factual.
Yeah.
Although it is real, because it is something real, but it is temporary, and that's why it's called not factual.
And also because the self is actually higher than this matter. The self is superior to matter, and so therefore we have a good, really, we can be so optimistic. So even though we find ourselves so helpless in the face of this energy, but actually we are superior, so we have a good chance of actually controlling it if we just give it a try.
Otherwise, there won't be any meaning to the process of yoga.
I think we already talked about
So
this, right?
yeah, this is so Krishna describes the whole process of yoga, especially the Ashtanga yoga in chapter 6, and advises Arjuna to become focused on the self by controlling the mind. But Arjuna says, hey Krishna, wait a minute. This mind is restless, it is turbulent, it's obstinate and very strong. Oh Krishna, and to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. So he basically reveals the power of mind. He says, I need some better tool to control the mind. And at that point, then Krishna starts. So this is pretty much like the end of 6th chapter. And then starting from 7th chapter, then Krishna starts describing the Bhakti Yoga, which is the easiest way to control the mind.
This is a really fun story from Mahabharata. So the story goes like, there's a man who's being chased by a mad elephant. And as he's running down, he's very scared, and he comes to the edge of a cliff. And when he comes to the edge of a cliff, he looks down and he sees that there is a, deep valley, and it would be just like a, straight fall. And then he looks at the back and he sees the elephant is getting really, really close, and he doesn't know what to do. So he decides to jump off the cliff. So when he jumps off the cliff, instead of falling into the valley, he actually, there's a branch of a tree that, that he finds. And he falls and he grabs that branch of the tree, and he doesn't fall straight, he actually falls upside down.
So he's hanging onto the branch upside down. In this picture that we could find, he's holding the branch with his hand, but regardless, he's hanging upside down from this branch. And below in the valley, there's a pond or something, or there's a pit which is filled with snakes. So they are just waiting in anticipation, when is this person going to fall, and they're going to feast on him. And on the another branch of the tree, there is a beehive like buzzing with bees.
Right, and then the elephant comes. He's really angry. So when we are from Assam, where you get elephants. If they become mad, then they can even overturn a car.
Or they can destroy a whole
They
village.
can destroy a whole village. So he comes and then he sees this man has actually jumped off and he's hanging. He gets really angry and he starts shaking this tree really, really vigorously. And like you were saying, there was a beehive there. And so when he starts shaking, then the bees, they start coming out of the beehive. They start stinging this man.
And that is not enough. The branch from which he's hanging, there are two mice, black and white. They are nibbling at the branch and cutting it bit by bit. So we don't know how long this branch is going to last.
So in the midst of all of this, as he's upside down, and the beehive is at the top, and the bees are stinging him, and the mice are cutting the branch. There's a drop of honey that actually spills out of that hive and falls on his tongue, and then immediately he says, "Oh, actually, life is very good."
He kind of forgets all the dangerous situation he's in, the peril he's in, the pain he's in, and he basically starts enjoying this honey. And he forgets that he needs to figure out a way to get out of this dangerous situation. He becomes absorbed in the honey. So I guess this analogy is important, because this is kind of similar situation. A living entity in this material world there is so much peril, there's so much suffering in this material world. Like, for example, so we can compare what is what.
Oh yeah, right. So the elephant is actually compared to death, which is chasing a living being, and the bees and that are coming to sting the man are actually compared to all the family members, relatives, friends,
The world around us.
that is constantly stinging us in so many different ways. And the mouse,
The black and white mouse, they represent the day and night, because they are continuously nibbling away at our life. Our bodies is basically rushing towards death by these. The branch is compared to the body, and that is being eaten up by day and night.
and then the snakes are also compared to death. And also sometimes the elephant is also compared to kala, or time, that is chasing us. So either way, death, time, the idea being that this is the situation that we find ourselves in. And so
I guess this desire and this whole thing is basically orchestrated by this man thinking that life is good, and this is the illusion that is being created by the mind, and it is the man's greed or kind of intense desire to enjoy this honey. It keeps him hanging there. And that takes into our next topic, which is Bhagavad Gita describes that there are 6 enemies of the mind, and which basically the mind is constantly, normally when the enemy is outside, you can prepare for the enemy. But what if the enemy actually enters your own camp? And now you don't know who's the enemy and who's the friend, because it's like friendly fire now. And the 6 enemies which are described is lust, anger, greed, envy, illusion, and madness. So those are the 6 enemies. And then so we'll touch upon lust, which is the driving force of all the other enemies. So Krishna talks a lot about that lust in chapter 3.
Right, it's what covers the mind, because we've talked
Covers
about
the soul, yeah.
covers the soul.
Yeah.
It's the fire that actually burns us. And actually there's a question that Arjuna asked Krishna. He says that, I think mentioned that question earlier. So what is the reason why a person goes on, doing things that are so self-destructive, knowing fully well that this is not good, I don't want to do it, but I still go ahead and I still do it. What is the reason for that? And then Krishna answers that question by saying that it is lust alone that is the all-devouring enemy of this world. So this lust is actually, which is, by the way, before we get into lust, we need to mention that lust cannot be destroyed. And the reason why lust cannot be destroyed or suppressed or neglected is because lust is a we're coming.
Next slide.
Okay. So should we first go there and then come to upside down? That way we can.
Yeah. So this is lust is described as upside down reflection of our original love for the Supreme Divine that we have. The soul is made of this love for Krishna, for the Supreme Divine. And when the soul lands up in this material world, then this original love of the soul kind of transposes upside down into lust. So this intense desire to enjoy matter, intense desire to enjoy this body, intense desire to enjoy the things of this material world is called lust. But because it's an upside down reflection of this love, love is compared to gold and lust is compared to iron.
Exactly. There's another nice story that just came to my mind, which actually narrates this. How we are constantly running after the reflection. So this lust is the reflection. So there's a story of this man. The king had actually announced that his necklace of his queen was lost, and so everyone was looking. Whoever would get it, they would get a big prize. So this man, he was walking by and he saw in this pond there was something glittering, and so he thought, oh, okay, it looks like that might be the necklace. So he gets into that pond, and as he keeps going deeper and deeper into the pond,
he starts digging into the mud,
and he gets all dirty, and he cannot find it. Every time he goes and he tries to touch the glitter seems to move away, and
he can't grasp it.
He cannot grasp it, and so he keeps getting more and more frustrated. And there was a wise sage who's going by, and he sees this man totally tired, and he says, "What's wrong with you? What are you up to?" And he doesn't want to share because he thinks the sage will get the necklace. But finally, he says, "Well, I can see that there's a glitter here. I can see there's a necklace, but when I try to get close to it, then I'm not able to get it." So then the sage says, "It's because what the necklace is actually hanging on a branch on a tree above, and what you're seeing is the reflection, and you're running after the reflection, forgetting that the real necklace is up here." So in the same way, this lust and love, the lust is actually a reflection, a perverted reflection of this love, and so we are looking for the right thing in the wrong place. Our desire for that gold necklace is well placed, but where we are looking for is where we are off course.
So as we talked about, this lust or desire for material things in this world is an upside down reflection.
As adults, we take it all for granted. But in Chicago, psychologist Hubert Dolezal has devised a bizarre way to test how well our brains can adjust when everything we've spent years learning is turned on its head. He's built a set of goggles that flip the world upside down.
Hello, Hubert.
Hubert has been wearing his goggles non-stop for 2 weeks now. We're going to see how well our human guinea pig learns to cope after just a few hours.
So this is what happens. Like initially, when somebody wears these goggles, everything is upside down. They can't figure their way out. But slowly the brain adjusts to it, and then it starts appearing normal. So same thing has happened to the soul when it comes to this material world. It's all upside down. Our upside down means our focus becomes our body, our mind, our material things, and we start saying that this is where my consciousness needs to be invested in, and that rather than investing in the soul, rather than investing in God, the upside down love, the love turns upside down into lust.
Right. When that love is directed through the medium of the self, the real self, then that is love. When that same love, when it's directed through the medium of this gross body, the mind, and everything that is connected to the gross body, the world of matter, then it becomes lust. Same energy, two different directions.
And therefore, lust has unstoppable force. People do so many things in pursuit of what they want to achieve and enjoy it. And therefore, as you are saying, the lust cannot be stopped. It needs to be transformed. So the whole process of Bhakti Yoga is to transform this lust into love. So anyways, this is an interesting video. You can watch it later. But it says that the gold has a glitter. And one of the impressive quality of gold is you can take a small amount of gold and you can stretch it. And it can go around the whole earth many times. And similarly, this is the power of love also. Love, original love, is so powerful that it can cover the whole planet actually.
I guess another thing I was thinking, the difference between gold, love has been compared to gold, and lust is compared to cheap metal or iron. And so one of the differences is that gold never rusts, and base metal, when exposed to the elements, will actually change colors and will rust. So that's what we see in this world, and that's why we are frustrated in this world, because when we try to engage in acts of love, we find ourselves feeling more and more frustrated, and then we wonder whether how can this be love? Well, it's not. It is a semblance. It's a reflection of love.
Yeah, so this is again Dante's Inferno, where this whole topic of lust is addressed. And what he describes is actually through brain scans and MRI scanners that they're able to see that how certain parts of the brain, they get activated by lust. And
it's just like addicts receiving their cocaine fix. So there's actually a study Where is that study? Oh, there it is.
Your brain on love.
Brain on Love. Should we watch that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We can watch for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the clip here.
Okay.
So anyways, the scientist, she's explaining that how when people fall in love, and she did her study with so many people and monitored their brain through MRI scans and things like that. She found that certain parts of the brain they lit up when people are in love or they are out of love.
When they break up, actually that center lights up even more. And so and then she's comparing that to people who are addicted, and then how the brain actually the same brain centers actually respond. So the point being that what's passing off as love is actually this is not the real deal for the self, because the real love that the Bhakti text talk about is actually not chemically induced, right? It's more than that.
So here in the third chapter, Krishna talks about the three coverings of lust, how lust covers in three different thicknesses actually. And the first one is the dust covered by fire covered with smoke is the first layer, and that is the thinnest covering of lust. And then the next one is dust covered with mirror, and
Mirror covered with dust.
Sorry, mirror covered with dust. And the last one is the child in the womb, where the consciousness is so the fire covered with smoke is compared to humans, where our consciousness is more or less awake, still covered but more or less awake. Because you can still see fire through the smoke. And the mirror covered with dust is the next covering, where you can't really see the reflection in the mirror. The covering is even more thick. And the child in the womb is in the covering. The covering is so thick that you can't even see. We cannot see the child in the womb.
We cannot see the child. And so that is actually different layers of consciousness. Even in the world, we can see that different people actually have different layers of consciousness, or different levels of consciousness. And so the covering of lust is actually different for different people. And of course, the less thick the covering is, the easier it is for the person to rekindle their original consciousness.
And I guess through this process of Bhakti Yoga, what we're trying to do is remove this covering of lust. And our goal is to become like a fire where there is no smoke and the fire is fully ablaze. The fire of our original consciousness is fully ablaze. So another interesting story, but I guess we can
skip that. Basically, it says that people think, oh well, once I grow old, then maybe my lust will go away. But actually, it never goes away. By the way, just a little side point here: lust doesn't just mean physical sex or whatever. It just lust is actually when it's
the Sanskrit word is called kama, which literally means our desire for anything material.
Anything material. So lust is actually a much broader topic. It's an umbrella for any desire that is not connected to the pure self. And so here, of course, it is being referred to this, Akbar and Birbal, they have a lot of conversations going on. So
Akbar was a Mughal emperor in like 15th century AD in India, and he had a very wise minister called Birbal.
Yeah. So yeah, we once asked Birbal that, like Akbar, Birbal, when does lust go away? When does a man actually lose desire for, enjoyment? And Birbal said, never. And he says, how can that be? What is an old man, dying man, whatever? How is he going to experience any desire? And so Birbal said, all right. So one day, he knew of an old man who was about to die. And so he told Akbar, come quickly, we'll go meet this old man. But when you come, please don't forget to bring your daughter with you as well. So both Akbar and his daughter and Birbal, they went to see this dying man, and they were talking. And later when they came out, then Birbal told Akbar that, did you see that even as he was dying, his eyes were actually fixed on...
So Akbar was very disappointed when they reached there, because this dying man, although the emperor had come, he was not even looking at the emperor. He was focused on his daughter. And then Akbar asked Birbal, what's going on? He said, this is what is going on.
Yeah.
And then Akbar, the king, realizes that he got answer to his question.
And then this is another question. This is a very famous story of how much do we need? So this relentless greed for more and more is a manifestation of this lust. And this is a story of this man who, who's given this, boon that you can, as far as you can run, you can cover as much land, and that land will be yours.
But the only condition is that you have to come back to the starting point. So if you can do that, then whatever land you have covered will be yours. So this farmer starts running and running and running. And in the greed, thinking, let me just go a little bit more, forgetting that he has to come back the same distance by sunset. And at some point he realizes that he's gone too far, there's no way. And then he starts running back even with greater force, but he's exhausted. And in middle of somewhere, he just
he falls
drops
and
dead and dies.
And then I guess the point is that he only needed like a 6 feet, area to actually be buried. So the thing is, how much do we really need? But this is actually what keeps us going in this world forever and ever.
And that's what this whole advertising industry preys on, that the desire for us to get more, and our fickle nature of our mind, which is very quickly bored with things.
Can you hear me now? Good. When we look at magazines, we see the relentless pursuit of perfection everywhere. So we try harder. We want quality in everything we do. Somehow we're made to believe that inspiration comes standard. But get out there. What are the real ingredients for life? Marketing, whether you like it or not, is a vital part of your world. Marketeers try pleasing people the world over. They use the power of dreams and put our imagination at work. They'll create the illusion of something special in the air. But what they're really interested in is what's in your wallet. And it keeps going and going and going. The miracles of science, and neuroscience in particular, helps us to think different, to look at marketing with higher standards.
And as this goes on, we found this very witty, how all these advertisements are created to get us hooked.
It starts early.
And then once we get hooked, then we get unhinged very quickly. This is you can watch this video how people go crazy on Black Friday sales and ready to toss each other and hit each other for a TV set and things like that.
So just a little, again, just to back off this is again an aspect of how we talked about lust, right? And that how there's a progression of lust. So the first thing that happens is that we actually, the senses start to engage. And so this whole advertising industry is doing a great job of engaging the senses with objects that will, stimulate the senses.
And it's basically engaging with our mind.
It's engaging.
They want a plot in our mind.
Yeah.
That real estate that we have.
Yeah, exactly. And so then once the mind receives that, then it wants it. Now, the thing with lust is that there are two responses to it. If lust is not satisfied, it leads to anger. And if lust is satisfied, then it leads to dissatisfaction.
And it wants more, because it's like putting butter in fire. And greed. It wants more and more, and nothing is sufficient. It can devour the whole world and still not feel satisfied.
Exactly. I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said that there are two tragedies in this world. One is not getting what you want, and the other is getting it.
The bigger tragedy is getting it.
Is getting it. So this is the quality of lust. And so we see that, I think we can skip this.
This is interesting. Just see how it
You're watching America This Morning, America's #1 early morning news.
Parents considering giving their toddlers too much too soon in the way of gadgets might want to rethink that strategy.
This is what happens when mom and dad take away an iPad from 2-year-old Ashlyn Brooks.
Anyways, we have our own iPads that we
and so wherever we see anger, we should know that the source of that anger is always lust.
Unsatisfied, intense desire to get something. And so Mahabharata, another wisdom text, it says there are 5 traps that we are constantly fighting with. And Krishna says even one of them can completely trap us. So what about, he says that actually the animals, they are trapped by one particular thing, but as human beings, we have 5 things that can trap us. So we are in a worse situation.
So I guess, to quickly go through them, the deer is actually trapped by its desire for sound. So it's described that the hunter actually plays beautiful music that attracts the deer. The elephant is trapped by his desire for sense of touch. The moth eyes, because it rushes into fire. The bee sense of smell, and the fish is through the sense of taste, right? If there's a bait that is thrown and the fish rushes to catch it, and then it gets captured.
So all these animals, they get trapped because of weakness of one of their senses. But as human beings, we have weaknesses in all our 5 senses. So our job is even more difficult. And therefore, I guess learning this art of controlling our mind is very, very important for us. So Krishna says even one of the senses can carry us away. So what about all 5 working against us? So Arjuna finally asked that, so how do I control the mind? So Krishna says that, O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment.
And so that's the key, you know, because otherwise so far I was thinking, oh my God, this feels like really, really difficult.
A lost task.
Yeah, lost task. Everything is against me. But there is a way for us to actually train the mind, to pacify the mind, to actually give the mind something that will allow the mind to get pacified. In fact, just the word mantra that we've been practicing every day is actually made up of 2 words. The first part of the word is mana. So mana means the mind, and tra means that which can free the mind. So it's a tool for us to actually train and free the mind.
So we won't watch this video, but here they train the monkeys to help disabled people.
And by the way, they use sound.
They use sound
to train the monkey. So just like that, we're also using sound to train our monkey mind.
So tolerating desires, that's another thing Krishna recommends in the 2nd chapter, that treating these desires which are rushing into us, not giving into these desires, but just tolerating them, just letting them. When we see a desire, we can think of it as a river just rushing to the ocean. We don't have to jump into that river. We just observe it, and another river will come, another river will come. So that's another way of, once we wean off our mind from acting on these desires, then the mind will start losing interest in
that is
those
definitely
desires.
one way of tolerating, but sometimes the desires are so strong that we really don't know what to, how to, because the problem is, and I think we mentioned this earlier, that the reason why these desires are very difficult to control is because they're a manifestation, or they're a reflection of the original desires,
which is the spiritual desire,
which is the spiritual desires,
this love,
right? So we cannot repress it artificially, but what we can do is we can transform them. And once they're transformed, then it becomes very natural for us actually to be, then the mind control is just a side, something, side benefit. We don't have to work so hard at it.
Yeah, it comes, and that's where mantra meditation comes.
Mantras are, they're not descriptive things. They're like, boulders of energetic sound.
There was some part of me was like, oh, this is way too hippie, but in the same time, I felt I needed a big change in my life. I needed to find a completely new relationship with myself.
The mantra is an amazing medicine for the mind.
It's not about becoming something else. It's not about even losing yourself. It's about becoming yourself.
Mantra can help you to make the mind totally in silence. When there are no vibration, then you can see yourself who you are.
I was searching for something that made sense. The American vision of meeting someone, getting money, all of that. And still, it was like I was empty inside.
We're seeing a shift in the function of a very essential structure in the brain, the thalamus, that probably changes the way we see reality.
The bottom line is making that connection is what given me the power to actually exist, even in this realm of things.
1, 2, 3, 4. Karuna, Sagarima, Karuna, Sagarima. Hey!
Bhakti yoga and meditation saved my life.
So that's what mantra, it kind of transforms the mind inside out. It transforms that lust that we have, material desires into spiritual desires, lust into love. And once it is transformed at the root, then we don't have to make that effort.
Yeah.
So again, you can watch this video. It shows that meditation is not just kind of a superficial thing. It actually transforms our physical wiring inside the brain. It changes the wiring.
Completely changes the wiring, and the brain actually changes, I think, according to this study.
My co-author of the book Altered Traits is a neuroscientist, Richard Davidson. He has a lab at the University of Wisconsin. It's a very large lab. He has dedicated scanners. He has about 100 people working there. And he was able to do some remarkable research where he flew Olympic-level meditators who live in Nepal or India, typically, or some in France. He flew them over to the lab and put them through a protocol in his brain scanners and did state-of-the-art tests, and the results were just astounding. We found, for example, or he found that their brainwaves are really different. Perhaps the most remarkable finding in the Olympic-level meditators has to do with what's called a gamma wave. All of us get gamma for a very short period when we solve a problem we've been grappling with, even if it's something that's vexed us for months. We get about a half second of gamma. It's the strongest wave in the EEG spectrum. We get it when we bite into an apple or imagine biting into an apple. And for a brief period, a split second, inputs from taste, sound, smell, vision, all of that come together in that imagined bite into the apple. But that lasts very, very short period in an ordinary EEG. What was stunning was that the Olympic-level meditators, these are people who've done up to 62,000 lifetime hours of meditation, their brainwave shows gamma very strong all the time as a lasting trait, just no matter what they're doing. It's not a state effect, it's not during their meditation alone, but it's just their everyday state of mind. We actually have no idea what that means, experience.
Anyways, watch this video, quite interesting. So, a practical way how to deal with this chatter of the mind, how to transform our mind into our friend. So this is a story.
This is a story. This is actually, this is described that if you have two foxes and they're fighting with each other, which fox is going to win? And so the answer being the fox that you feed. So we have freedom and we have a choice to feed our consciousness, feed our mind, what we take in through the senses. It is described in Ayurveda. The word for food is called ahar. But ahar is not just the food in the mouth. Ahar is anything and everything that we consume through our eyes, through our ears, through the nose, everything. And so what we consume through the senses will directly impact our mind. And whatever we are consuming, whatever we are taking in, that's the fox that will become stronger. And so this is the practice of bhakti. Bhakti actually starts at the level of the senses. So we engage all our senses, right?
So we don't have to worry about, say, when we start a spiritual journey, then I guess focusing on the positive things, spiritual positive things that we can do, and feeding that fox, continuously feeding the fox, and other fox, like our negative thoughts and our anger and those things, they will, once this fox becomes stronger and stronger, then those things will naturally become weaker, and because we are not giving them attention.
Exactly, because if you remember, the one thing that Krishna speaks about is he says that being a pretender is not going to help. So we have to, first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that our minds are crazy and it's drunk, and that's all right. And the fact is that we are struggling with the mind. All right. Now we can't repress it artificially, because that will lead to anger. Because if you remember, lust that is not satisfied will lead to anger. So we cannot artificially, change that or suppress it. But what we can do is start adding this positive vibration through the process of mantra meditation, through the process of engaging the senses in all different aspects of bhakti. More we immerse this mind in acts of bhakti, the more the mind will start to get transformed and will get pacified, just like a little child who's very restless. Now, if you just tell the child to go and sit in a dark room or in a quiet room in a corner and say, okay, we're going to engage in silence, complete silence. You don't get to talk, you don't get to see. So you're completely like withholding the senses.
Still.
Just sit still. How long can the child do that before the child actually gets even more restless because of being pulled back? So that process of meditation is it may help for some time, but it doesn't help in the long run. But the power of mantra meditation and the power of bhakti is that the senses are actually happily engaged.
And it is Bhakti Yoga is designed in such a way that all our five senses and our mind it's joyfully engaged in the spiritual activities, and then they don't hanker for other things.
Yeah, just like I remember our son when he was growing up, we actually homeschooled him. And one of the things that we found was that because he loved art, he could actually sit in a room, with his art, his easel, and just be there for like hours and be completely happy, right? So we see that's what the mind needs. The mind is a restless child, and it needs some happy engagement, some spiritual engagements that can completely pacify and make the mind very, very happy. Actually, this might be a good place.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is the last slide.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share a poem on the same topic, and then we can end there. My mind and I, friend or foe, stuck in a rut, nowhere to go. Dear mind, we've gone through lives in a state of constant cry. You sigh, and I reply. Indeed, I think of you as I. You are never content. The mind replied, I appear a difficult child, always a hue and cry. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know what I want. Happy at first, then disgusted. Books of wisdom propound, ways to keep me bound. Empty me, chain me, deny me till I die. None can appreciate my pitiful state. I then offered my friend a taste of sacred sound. One swish and he smiled. Joy of eons found. So, we cannot really chain the mind. We cannot empty the mind. We cannot deny the mind. The mind is not satisfied. So what we do instead is we provide the mind with nectar that the mind is looking for.
So we provide the mind with a higher taste. And once Krishna says in second chapter, text 69, that once you get the higher taste, then the lower taste will automatically go away. And this is kind of quite evident in this very funny video. There's a place in India, Vrindavan, where Krishna came. And in that place is filled with a ton of monkeys. And this is what they do.
These monkeys have turned to a life of crime. Brazen, audacious. They're deliberately targeting humans. They never hurt their marks. They're just grabbing anything of value. But this stealing is still all about food. Just not in the way that you'd expect. They're holding our stuff for ransom. You see, these monkeys are stealing valuables they know we want back, and then using them to barter with us for food. They won't give up their loot, not until they're offered the specific food that they want. Often, it's the fare with the highest nutritional value.
So this is what the mind is actually. When the mind gets the real thing it's looking for, then it will naturally let go of the other things. So I guess that's what we focus on, giving the mind.
We focus on the positive.
We focus on the positives.
So with that,
I think this is the last one.
Yep.
Yeah, so that brings to our conclusion of this third session. We talked about mind. Mind is another material energy of God. Krishna says in the 7th chapter that I have eight energies here: earth, water, fire, air, space, and then the mind, intelligence, and pulse ego. Those are the subtle energies. And so therefore it is not us. And we don't have to constantly think that, okay, whatever my mind says is me. It is not me. And once we separate ourselves, then we can see our own power over the power of mind. Because right now the mind seems all powerful. We talked about how to deal with the mind through mantra meditation, through spiritual sound. That's the easiest way, because then the mind can get a higher taste, and it can become free. And then this sound also actually extricates all these forces, these enemies of the mind, which are six, to lead the mind. Okay.
And that's it, the mind can become our best friend.
So we'll end it there, and we'll take any comments, questions, reflections, objections.
Aditi, do you want to?
Yeah, lead us off, or whoever is managing the questions today. Yeah, go ahead. You're muted.
I unmuted. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Yeah, there was some really interesting discussion and questions, and actually it was really beautiful as people were asking questions. Others were also offering reflections that answered the questions. It's really lovely. So there was one question that there was a lot of discussion around. So I'll share the question as well as a little bit of reflection, and then invite you to answer. So the question is from Daphne Gulling, and it's, what about making peace with the mind as opposed to the mind being the enemy? I believe the mind is a gift. I'm having a problem with the word lust being considered negative along with the mind being considered negative. And Canella offered a beautiful reflection. It isn't the impulse of lust so much as it is our attachment to what we desire. This is also why we have so much trouble settling into meditation, and we find it hard to concentrate. We have many mental and sensory attachments.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Actually, it's exactly the point. As the question was being raised, I was thinking that's exactly what our teacher also speaks, that we cannot eliminate desire. Desire is not a bad thing, because desire is actually an attribute of the self. So
the soul.
The soul. So we cannot eliminate desire. It's not a bad thing. The mind is our best friend. It's not a negative thing. It's the covering. It's misdirected desire.
Originally, the mind is clean and pure, but as we accumulate more and more desires, and then mind gets covered more and more, that's when it starts giving us trouble.
Yeah, and also, like you rightly pointed out, the mind is not something that we want to deny. Desires are not something we want to deny. Those are gifts that we've been given, and those gifts, when they are used, for the purpose that they're there, then they become the way that we actually experience the greatest joy.
Yeah,
right.
And each one of our senses is a gift. Our mind is a gift. Our intelligence is a gift. Yeah. Just kind of finding out what's the right way to use it.
And we don't want to, Prabhupada also uses another example. He says, if we didn't have the mind and we didn't have the desires, we would be like a dead stone. So that's not the point of bhakti. It's not to become like a stone, but we want to experience the extent that we haven't actually explored the highest potential of the mind and the highest potential of our desires.
Yeah, because right now we are probably not even experiencing 0.1% of the power of our mind.
So I don't know, Daphne, if that helps. If you have any further, would love to hear if you have any further thoughts on that. It's desires that are beneficial for the real self.
Yeah.
Is Daphne still there? Or?
I'm not sure. I don't see. Yeah, I do see her there.
Okay, go ahead. You can take the next reflection or question.
Okay. Another question is, how do we develop our intelligent mind? From Jody Arrington.
Yeah, how do we develop our intelligent mind? Yeah, so the key there is refining our intelligence. And we refine our intelligence with spiritual sound vibration, with spiritualizing our senses. So Bhakti Yoga offers that in all different ways, like through spiritual sound, through spiritual knowledge, by thinking about spiritual knowledge and thinking about the nature of the self, that analysis, critical analysis that we do in our mind, that helps us develop a clear conception of who we are and a sense of detachment, and then engaging in these different spiritual activities. Those are practical, easy ways to spiritualize our intelligence and spiritualize our mind.
Actually, sound moves consciousness. So the more we associate with spiritual sound, the more the intelligence becomes fortified. So just like how do I become strong physically is by taking in nutrient-rich, meals. So same way, how do I fortify my intelligence is by taking in, nutrition. And the nutrition for the intelligence and for the mind is actually spiritual sound. So what we do with this mantra meditation, what we do when we are reading these ancient bhakti wisdom texts, what we are doing when we come together
and discuss,
that is all a manner of fortifying the self. So next time, just as an example, right now we heard this, the next time we are in a situation, this knowledge will actually come to us when we need it the most. Because that's what we notice.
I'm noticing a few people have their hands raised.
So yeah, let's take those. Saida, and
but then there are also, I think what we could do is we can go back and forth because people have also posted their questions.
Right.
Right. So Aditi, how would you like to do?
We don't have very many questions here, so maybe I will just ask 2 more and then we can go to the raised hands.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the next question is, what is in charge when a person experiences interruption to the mind through non-ordinary states of consciousness, like seizures or comas? And it comes from Zoe.
Say the question again.
Sorry. What is in charge when a person experiences interruption to the mind through non-ordinary states of consciousness, like seizures and comas?
Who is in charge?
You can see the question. What's in charge?
Okay.
So yeah, this is a very good question because it may seem that that's what we were talking about, that sometimes it may seem that the brain is not operational or there is some interruption there, but it's really good for us to understand the difference between the brain and the mind. So even though the brain may experience an interruption
or a
seizure through
or even
coma or even like near-death experience, but actually the mind actually is always there. The mind is subtle. It does not experience the interruption that the brain or the physical body will experience.
So the brain is kind of dead, and therefore the mind is not able to express itself through the brain and therefore through our body. But the brain doesn't go through a seizure. The mind doesn't go through a seizure. The mind doesn't go through a coma. It's just the brain.
And actually there is a study, I think we shared that video last time, I think, where this neurosurgeon, he talks about this, right? That how even when a person is he's declared dead clinically, there is no way, there's no brain activity, but the person actually comes back to life. Then he's able to remember. So that shows that how there is something that survives the brain, and that's the mind. So hope that helps, Zoe.
But there is a constant, our physical body affects the mind. So there's this interaction between body and mind that goes both ways. But mind is an independent entity.
And then there's one more question. Does bhakti help you realize what is true to who you are? From Christine.
Yes, most definitely. Practices of bhakti directly address the root of the problem, which is our original love for God transformed into this lust to enjoy this material world. And when that lust starts getting transformed into love, then all these other problems associated with our mind, with our intelligence, they start getting back in place, that they start getting addressed. So we are not trying to address one thing at a time in bhakti. We are addressing the whole thing in a wholesome way at the root level. And then we're starting to become healthier again, returning to our original consciousness. And these all the other things, then they will start just falling away.
Yeah, we don't have to make too much effort in controlling the mind. All we have to do is let the mind be captivated.
Yeah.
So the process of bhakti is for the mind to be captivated by this deep love, that then the mind is no longer interested. Just like if any one of us here were given this amazing meal, like a plate of our favorite food, whatever, then we would be so happy that we're not going to think of anything else, right?
Yeah.
So you're so full.
So if somebody gives us a plate of broken pieces of glass and another plate is our most favorite meal, then we'll naturally go for our favorite things, right? We don't have to think twice. So right now the mind is attracted to these broken pieces of glass. And once the mind becomes attached to the real thing, then it will just happily ignore the broken pieces of glass.
That is all the questions that I have here. So if the people who have their hands raised,
yes,
can speak with them.
Okay, so yeah, in order, Sadia and Julian and Kim, go ahead.
All right. Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for having this class. I'm really enjoying it. My question is for a clarification with when you use the word intelligence, because I understand what it is you mean when you're referring to intelligence, but the population at large, we know there are different types of intelligence. And when you speak of improving our intelligence, I want to have some kind of adjective in front of that word intelligence and what type, just for clarification for the crowd.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Yeah, spiritual intelligence.
Yeah.
Which encompasses all other, in it as well. But what we are trying to purify is our spiritual intelligence, intelligence that can actually help us to guide the mind, to sort of help the mind, assist the mind, right?
Yeah, to make the choices which are beneficial for our real self. And you rightly said we have different kinds of intelligence, emotional intelligence,
Special, there's so many.
So many different kinds of intelligence.
IQ, just a regular
But
intelligence.
once our spiritual intelligence kind of becomes revitalized, then these all other intelligences will also become they will get the benefit from this. Our emotional intelligence, which naturally will become stronger.
I think there are actually some psychologists who have actually started talking about, apart from IQ, EQ, they've also started talking about SQ. That it is a very important part of our development. So I don't know if that's where you were going with this. I'd love to hear you, share.
Yes, I think what we usually use is consciousness. Is that when you speak of spiritual intelligence, is that is synonymous with when we're saying, oh, I'm a conscious person, I'm an awakened person? Is that, or is there another word?
No, it's basically it's spiritual intelligence, which means that, as you're saying, which is in alignment with our self, with our consciousness, and it's conscious and it's awakened, and it's not driven by the mind anymore. It's not driven by the senses anymore. It's able to stand on its own 2 feet and help the mind take decisions which are ultimately beneficial for us.
So yeah, there is a difference between consciousness and intelligence. Consciousness is a quality of the soul. Whatever consciousness we have, it's coming from the soul. Intelligence and mind, they are material tools that are given to us to figure our way out in this world. And both our intelligence and mind, they are alive because of our original consciousness, right? Just like a toy car, the toy car is there, but unless you put the battery in, it's not going to run. So that battery is our consciousness, which enlivens our material mind and material intelligence and material senses. And so once now those material mind and intelligence, they can be spiritualized. So that's what we are doing to this process of bhakti. We are spiritualizing those mind and that mind and intelligence, which are material tools given to us.
But once they're spiritualized, they're no longer material.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They become part of that spiritual consciousness.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, they become part of the spiritual consciousness.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, go ahead, Aditi.
Canella has made an interesting point. Is this a question, Canella, for Saida or for the teachers? Okay, so the question is, are you referring to persons with developmental delays or congenital disorders which impair the mental faculty?
That's a good, yeah, and it doesn't matter. Go ahead, Saida.
When I asked the question, I was thinking the spiritual intelligence, not the intellectual capacity.
Yes, yes. And that is correct. Actually, we have seen this in our own experience of studying bhakti and also teaching bhakti, that material intelligence is not the same as spiritual intelligence. People may be materially very intelligent, but they may not be able to, unless their spiritual intelligence is not refined, they will actually not understand the spiritual truth. And a person may be spiritually intelligent and may not exhibit the same characteristics of material intelligence, but it functions in a completely different dimension. It may trickle over, but not necessarily, right? So it's not true that a person who's spiritually intelligent will do very well on, say, an IQ test, right?
I think we can take the next raised hand. I think Julian Horner.
Hey, yeah, thanks guys. I just really love this reflection, or what you said about how sound is what really gets us out of the mind or frees us from that monkey mind. And like, it's kind of a reflection question, but do you think that is because, you know, ultimately the creator, the divine, it's at one of its aspects, I believe, is sound, and I believe also light. And then of course, many other aspects, right? But those are like the big ones in my mind. So is it just because we're merging with something that's ultimately more our true nature, right? Than this monkey mind? If you could just kind of extrapolate on that. And love the class.
Yes, sorry, go ahead. What's your question?
I don't know. That was just my question. Like, if you think that, you know, why is sound so transcendental? I'm sure we'll get into it on that session. So I'm looking forward to that as well. But yeah.
Very good question. Yeah, I mean, not all sounds are transcendental. Transcendental sound is transcendental, and this is an easy way, I guess, to engage the other senses is very difficult. Therefore, Krishna has made himself available through sound. Like if you look at all the Vedic texts, initially this whole creation happens through sound, and this whole knowledge is made available through sound. Like the Vedas and Upanishads, they are all just manifestations of this transcendental sound. And sound being so sublime and so subtle, it can have the quickest impact on our consciousness. So there is a very intimate connection between our consciousness and sound.
Yeah. It moves us. So like and that's actually why, you know, if you associate with material sound, we'll talk more about this in our session on sound. If we associate more with material sound, then it'll generate, you know, the quality of material sound is that it'll generate stress, anxiety, more desires, you know, and, you know, dissatisfaction within the heart. And when we associate with spiritual sound, then it leads to this development of spiritual intelligence, spiritual desires, happiness, satisfaction, and that's how we, you know, we transform our consciousness. So you're absolutely right that consciousness and sound are actually very intimately connected. And
that's the easiest way to associate with the divine is through the medium of
just
sound.
like what you said. I really like what you said. That sound is an aspect of that supreme, you know, supreme person.
Because right now we cannot taste or touch or smell the divine with our eyes or nose or our tongue or our hands, but we can connect with the Supreme through sound very quickly, even at our given stage at this point.
Go ahead, Aditi. I think we are running out of time. I think we'll...
Yes, I think there are 3 more raised hands. So I don't know if you want to take those questions now or at the Q&A or.
No, we can do 5 more minutes.
Maybe we can do 5 more minutes. Okay.
Okay. And if we don't get to everyone's questions, you can attend the Q&A on Sunday, or you can send your questions on Mighty Networks as well.
Okay.
So it's Kim Dulé is the next raised hand. Kim, you can unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you. My question is a little bit in line with what you're just talking about and what you brought up, Julian. And your thought about sound makes me think about the fact that everything is really energy, and that energy is vibration. And so maybe that's why the sound connects us so much. Maybe certain vibrations resonate in a more positive way than others. But my question was about the senses in general, and that within the Bhagavad Gita, it explains that the senses are below the mind, But somewhere in my yoga practice, I have been taught that when my mind is in its monkey state and I can't seem to get out of it, that a way to do that is to focus on every sense, whether I find something I see, a sunset, something I hear, a bird, something I smell, the feel of the wind on my face. And those senses can take me out of the mind and put me in a place where I can connect to something deeper. And so I'm just trying to think about that experience and what we're learning about senses being lower and not as, I don't know, high spiritually, if that's the right way to term it. And I don't know, just your thoughts about that.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. I love your questions actually, and this is actually what you said about the yoga practice is exactly what the bhakti practice also talks about. That even though the senses are considered to be in a hierarchy lower than the mind, at the same time, the senses have a very, very important part to play in actually transforming the mind, which is exactly what you said. That we engage all our senses. All our senses are actually can be engaged in all kinds of spiritual activities. So the eyes can actually see, the beautiful forms, and then we make a connection, like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spends a lot of time talking about how we can use our senses. So when we drink water, for example, he says, I am that taste of water. So when you drink water, then we can think of Krishna, or we can think of the divine. When we see something beautiful, he talks about all the beautiful things that are there in this world. And so making that connection in that way allows us to receive. So as we talked about this, that the mind actually acts on what the input it receives from all the senses. So by changing what's being received by the mind actually also gets transformed. So it's a symbiotic relationship.
And I guess your point about focusing on a particular sense to help the mind come out of its wranglings, it works it works for a little bit. Like we can focus on our what we are feeling through our like feeling the breath or feeling focusing on something. It allows the mind to get free from whatever it is tangled up with. But I guess the real thing that helps the mind is to spiritualize itself, and that for that we need a spiritual contact. The mind needs a spiritual contact,
and the senses need a spiritual contact.
The senses need a spiritual contact.
Yeah. And so when we connect the senses with things that are spiritual in nature, that's what we're doing, right? We're coming together, we're using the ears and allowing the ears to come in contact with spiritual sound. So that's exactly, we're not discarding or denying the senses. Another very powerful aspect of bhakti is actually eating, because the tongue is actually the most difficult sense to control. So in the practice of bhakti, we actually cook food in a certain consciousness, we offer it in love and devotion, and then we take that to the divine, and then we accept it. So just by doing that act, then the act of the tongue actually gets spiritualized.
And the smell gets spiritualized.
The smell gets spiritualized because we offer incense or beautiful fragrances, or even when we smell a beautiful flower, for example, when we make that connection that this smell is actually, coming, and in the Bhagavatam it is described that it's actually the smell. All smells are actually coming. The original source of that fragrance is the Supreme. So then, like that, all the senses are getting purified and they're getting spiritualized. So I don't know. There's Kim. If you have anything.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Zoe and then Susan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to make a quick comment. The part about the dust over the mirror, that really opened my heart up a bit, because I thought about people that I might judge, or politicians or whatever, and I just had a sense of everyone's trying to get back to themselves, and maybe there's more dust and I have it too, and it just sort of gave me a sense of connection with people maybe I otherwise wouldn't have, which I really appreciate. So thank you. And I guess I'm still struggling in terms of a question with where, if the body, the physicality seems to get in the way of, I guess what I feel from this course is I have a sense of agency in what I do spiritually and how I approach my life. And perhaps if I'm somebody who has significant bodily challenges that I can't, maybe I'm deaf and I can't hear sound, or I have schizophrenia and my mind is challenged, what goes on spiritually for people in those difficult physical situations?
Very nice, very nice. Actually, bhakti, it is described that
Go ahead.
yeah. Bhakti cannot be stopped by any material condition. So even if a person has some limitation, or like you were describing that suppose someone cannot see, so then there is the ear that we can use to hear. Someone cannot speak, then one can at least hear.
Yeah.
If someone cannot hear,
You can see
they
or
can
taste.
see or taste. So there is always something, and if nothing else, then just even just that sense of touch, right? Even that can purify someone. So anything, any contact through any of the senses. I mean, there are stories of, there is a whole community of devotees who cannot see. They actually read, the Sanskrit text. They cannot chant. And so they also have found a way of actually chanting. I'm not aware of what the exact technique is, but I was reading an article about how they're figuring out a way to chant, even though they're not able to utter the words themselves. So bhakti is actually unstoppable by any material. And if we cannot do anything at all, then at least we're going to eat something. So the act of actually taking prasadam is actually considered to be the most potent spiritual substance that can actually nourish us both materially and spiritually.
So prasadam is food, vegetarian food that we prepare and offer in love to the divine, and then we accept it.
And it's considered to be non-different from the divine.
And we have seen in our own lives the impact it has made.
So there's no room, there's no place for like, what if I cannot do? I start just a little bit, just a tiny little drop of bhakti is enough actually to transform our lives.
Yeah, bhakti is like water. Like if you have water leaks in our house, we see how water finds its way. So bhakti will find its way. If there is an obstruction here, it will come through the other hole.
Great, thank you.
Susan and
Can you hear me?
yes.
Hello. Okay. I was just wondering, because you mentioned the Vedas and the mantra going back as far as the Upanishads and the Vedas, and I was wondering if the Vedas were sung originally, and I had this sense when you were talking about it of something that goes back a very long way, and also not just what is sung, but what is heard.
Yeah.
So maybe there are more chapters that will go further into this subject about sacred sound. Kind of so I had a lot of questions came to mind, in particular about like where the songs came from and if they go back to the oral tradition.
I mean, I'm really amazed that you've obviously done, you're familiar with this. You're absolutely right. One of the words for the Vedas, a name for a Veda is called Shruti. Shruti means that which is heard. So you're absolutely right. The whole focus of that was actually the ability to hear. Upanishad literally means to sit in front of a teacher and actually just hear. So hearing is actually a very integral part, and there's actually a whole section where we are going to talk about the yoga of sound, and that how sound is so integral to the development of our consciousness. And all the Vedas and Upanishads are actually all recited, and they're all spoken, and they are heard. And in our current times, because we don't have access to that, so we focus on the Bhagavad Gita, which is the summary or the essence of all of those Vedas. And
they are recorded sound.
The recorded sound, exactly, the recorded sound. And then we're also coming together every evening to do mantra meditation. So this is your morning, our evening here in India. And so by doing all this, so please feel free to join if you haven't tried that. Please come for our mantra meditation sessions.
That's 9 a.m. Eastern every day we are doing that. And
I'd like to do. Yeah, and India time it's 7:30. So, that way we actually get a practical experience just by
In
connecting.
India time is 6:30 p.m.
I'm sorry, 6:30. Yeah. And just by doing that, then one starts to see how sound is actually transforming us.
Okay, I'd very much like to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Hema. That's lovely. Bhakti is like water. Makes me think of Pisces as the 12th and final sign of the zodiac. Thank you, Saida. So yes, if pause here, and if you have more questions, please come for our Q&A session. We'd love to know you more, and when you come in and ask your questions, we get to see and know more of you and what you're thinking.
So the Q&A session will be on Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And we also just wanted to quickly share, we also opened up our mentoring, spiritual mentoring services. So you can access that on the